guys, I am Parbram.
I am Muskan.
I am Archie.
And today we are going to see that US has done something out of this world and they have killed Iran's, the air power. And we have seen in the video in the comparison video that Iran's air power was actually nothing compared to USA. But now USA is just going all ham and they're killing all their jets. So I'm interested to see what US has done. So let's watch this video.
Iran spent 47 years building its air force. Didn't build a very good force, but it built something that it thought would at least allow it to maintain small pockets of air superiority over its own territory. But that didn't happen. In just 24 hours, the US wiped out Iran's entire air force.
24 hours.
It's gone.
Entire air force.
The shock and awe campaign has made even the prospect of an Iranian pilot taken to the sky suicidal. And there isn't a thing that Iran can do about any of it. The footage reveals everything. Shared by Max Afterburner, a video released by US Central Command shows just one of the multitude of strikes that the US conducted against Iran's aging fleet of aircraft. Sitting sullen and alone on an airfield, the Iranian jet is destroyed in a heartbeat. And this has been happening over and over across Iran. Every airbase the US strikes results in Iranian airframes going up in flames. And it's gotten to the point where Iran basically has no options in the skies. It can't send aircraft to fight against America's overwhelming force. The few that it had that might be able to put up a fight are gone, and what is left are the dregs of an air force that is decades behind the curve.
So then
We'll
why
explain
is
why
Iran
in just a
still
few
fighting?
minutes. But before we do, Afterburner explains what is happening to Iran's air force right now. They've completely dismantled Iran's air force, hitting bases like Tabriz, Afterburner explains. Looks like destroying even more F-4 Phantoms, Su-22 attack aircraft, ground attack aircraft mainly are being vaporized. F-14 Tomcats, F-5 Tigers, and drone sites before anything can turn a wheel. Literally nothing is getting airborne at this point.
Oh, so their jets are
Aerotime adds that
destroyed before
Israeli's
they're
Air
getting in
Force has
air.
confirmed that it destroyed an Iranian F-4 along with an F-5 at the Tabriz base as each of the aircraft prepared for takeoff. So even the Iranian pilots who were willing to attempt the suicide mission of taking on the US and Israel didn't get very far.
They can't
Both
do
the
it.
US and Israel have also been targeting the support facilities that enable airframes to take off. Satellite images reveal destroyed storage bunkers at the Konarak base and a shattered radar system at Zahedan. These weren't random strikes. The US and Israel coordinated to cripple Iranian air
It's
power
like they
before it ever
knew
had a chance to make
the
itself
whole
known.
of Iran.
You'll have already noticed that the
Where to
aircraft the
attack.
US is taking out would be considered old by any modern military standards. But these airframes are the best that Iran has, and they're being systematically destroyed by an American and Israeli bombing campaign that has already achieved the most important goal for the joint Operation Epic Fury and Operation Roaring Lion, achieve complete air superiority. That's according to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, who has confirmed that the US followed Israel's lead when it came to striking Iran just a few days ago, and that the scale of these strikes has devastated Iran's air force.
Israel
The
was
US
just
strikes
waiting.
have resulted in the establishment
US
of
to
local
say
air
yes.
superiority. This air superiority will not only enhance the protection of our forces, but also allow them to continue the work over Iran, Kane declares. For that to have happened, the US not only had to have ruined Iran's airframes, but also destroyed the country's air defences. As a little hint, the US has already done both. We'll be getting to Iran's air defense situation a little later. On the aircraft front, the US bombardments of Iran's air bases have been so effective that not a single one of Iran's pilots has taken off. Iran hasn't attempted any manned sorties during the 4-day war so far, and frankly, any pilot who does try to take to the skies now will be engaging in a suicide mission.
Actually,
Given
because
both the age of their aircraft and
completely
the sheer level
covered
of
by
air superiority that
America.
the US attained. Iranian fighter pilots also know that it's suicidal to go up against an F-15 Strike Eagle, F-16, F-18, or F-35, Afterburner explains.
F-35 is the best one.
America's bombing campaign has been so successful over a 24-hour period that what was once a fleet of about 400 Iranian aircraft has been whittled down to about 200.
Whoa!
In other words, what little aerial threat
Completely
that
half.
Iran could have posed in the sky has been halved before a single one of its airframes could get off the ground. And it seems likely that the US has focused most of its fire on the aircraft that could have presented something resembling a threat, which leaves Iran with an air force that is little more than a collection of poorly maintained airframes that were built decades ago.
So their old
This is
ones
what
are still
aerial
there, but the
domination
main ones are
looks
gone.
like. And the US planned it all well in advance. That's according to Business Insider, which reveals that the US and Israel did far more than fling missiles and bombs at Iran from its fighter jets during the opening hours of the war.
Like
Both
just
were much smarter than that.
Throw missiles
They knew
out,
that
like
for as
flinging.
little threat as Iran's fighter jets posed, flying in
Not
without
planning.
being prepared would still make their superior aircraft
Like
vulnerable.
how Iran is
The
doing.
outlet reports on more comments made by Kane, who said, that the US campaign against Iran, which began on February 28th, was kicked off with the layering non-kinetic effects, disrupting and degrading and blinding Iran's ability to see, communicate and respond. What this translates to is that the US and Israel launched cyber attacks and even space commands that crippled Iran's air force hours before the first US fighter jets took off in the direction of Tehran.
So main attack was before
Kane
the
says that
attack.
the initial non-kinetic US approach targeted everything from Iran's command and control facilities through to its ballistic missile sites and intelligence infrastructure in an operation that was designed to daze and confuse them. It worked. Before Iran even knew what was happening, up to half of its airframes were destroyed, and the air defences that were supposed to protect them, along with other key military nodes, had completely failed to take down even a single American or Israeli jet. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio argues that the US went proactively in a defensive way with its initial round of strikes, and that Iran has to get ready because the hardest hits are yet to come from the US military. That's the last thing that Iran's regime wants to hear. As it sifts through the wreckage of its destroyed fighter jets and other aircraft, the prospect of more coming when Iran is basically defenseless in the skies is terrifying. Iran will be wondering how all of this happened. How did its carefully laid plans for defeating the US fall apart so quickly? There are two answers to that question.
They are too
one
smart.
covering Iran's air defenses, and the other that dives into the detail about the state of that air force the country had built. We'll come to the second answer a little later in the video, but on the air defense front, there's no way to sugarcoat things for Iran. Its entire air defense network has utterly failed to do anything about the combined US and Israeli strikes. And that's why dozens, perhaps even hundreds of Iran's airframes are just craters in the ground right now. US President Donald Trump has already declared that Iran's air defenses are gone, along with its navy, air force, and most of its leadership structure. Trump also claims that Iran's missile capability is being diminished, which presumably also accounts for missiles that would have been fired by the country's air defense systems. We've had a very powerful impact. Virtually everything they had has been knocked out now. Their missile count is going down, Trump said on March 3rd. Dan Kane has emphasized this point when discussing the US and its air superiority, noting that Iran's air defenses have been degraded to the point where American pilots can fly with near impunity over Iranian territory.
What?
We're starting to see this in the nature of the US airframes that are flying into Iran right
care
now.
about like they are
For
over
instance,
Iran,
Asia
something
Times
can come
reports
and
that the
hit them.
US has started sending
They don't just
B-1
care.
Lancer bombers into Iran to conduct airstrikes, rather than the B-2 Spirit stealth bombers that America sent earlier in the conflict. This indicates a high level of confidence that Iran's long-range surface-to-air missile SAM systems are no longer a primary threat to non-stealth aircraft in certain corridors, the outlet reports. Adding that the US and Israel are now focused on destroying as many of Iran's transporter Erector launchers to take out even more of its air defense capabilities. And naturally, weaker air defenses create more opportunities for American bombers and fighter jets to do their business, which will almost inevitably lead to the loss of yet more Iranian airframes beyond those that the US destroyed in just 24 hours. The question has to be asked, how did Iran's air defenses fail so catastrophically in the first place? We'll get to that in a second, but before we do, you are watching The Military Show. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time to hit that button. Back to Iran's failed air defenses. We've already discussed how the US launched a non-kinetic campaign as a precursor to its early strikes, which likely took many of Iran's air defenses offline. However, Army technology reveals that there are more reasons why those defenses utterly failed to do the one thing they were designed to do. The outlet reports on the aggressive electromagnetic spectrum operations the US and Israel deployed, which would have shut down Iranian air defense radars so they couldn't see airframes and projectiles coming. However, this approach was combined with a more kinetic approach that saw the US and Israel divide their responsibilities. Specifically, the US took charge of strikes against Iran's air defenses, control centers, and much of the country's military and logistics infrastructure. Israel went after ballistic missile launchers and Iran's leadership.
Killing the leader.
This was made a lot easier on the air defense front because the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, had retained about 100 air defense systems, but likely didn't have many of the missiles needed to use those systems to their fullest. Another of Iran's air defense problems comes from the fact that it's deployed copycat systems throughout much of its network. Yes, Iran has some Russian and Chinese air defense systems, but most of what it has are reverse-engineered versions of those systems, Army technology reports.
Not useful enough.
For instance, Iran's Bavar 373 is just a cheap knockoff of the S-300 systems that Ukraine has been destroying in massive quantities in its war with Russia. Iran's Yazar is just a reverse-engineered version of China's HQ-7, and something similar can be said of Iran's Zubin system. What we see here is that Iran tried to go up against two of the world's strongest air forces with an air defense network filled with garbage copies of other countries' tech. That went about as well as you would expect. Right now, after Berner says the US has achieved air superiority in Iran due to these many air defense failures, Now America's goal has to switch to keep that superiority, because there are certain surface-to-air missile systems that are still alive and well after burning.
There are still some.
They'll pop out from a hiding spot and then launch a
They're
missile.
going to destroy
So the
even
US
that.
still has to take care in the
Whoa.
skies.
Iran
Iran's
will
air
be
defenses are
defenseless in few
crippled, but they're
days.
not quite dead. Still, they were useless enough to not be able to do a thing about America's 24-hour shock and awe campaign unleashed against the Iranian Air Force. And neither could Iran's airframes, which brings us back to the second reason why all of this happened to Iran. The simple fact is that Iran's Air Force was too weak to stack up to what the US brought to the table from the start. This was Mike Tyson delivering a haymaker to an old man with no arm. You'll have seen that in the age of the airframes.
Mike Tyson was an old man.
Beginning. Aerotime goes into more detail, noting that Iran's beleaguered Air Force had zero chance right from the start. The very best of its fighter jets include a fleet of 65 F-4s, 41 F-14s, 35 F-5s, and an assortment of Soviet-era Russian platforms, such as the Su-24 and MiG-29. Add a few tankers and special mission aircraft into the mix, and that's all Iran had. The country also has no airborne early warning fleet, which, when combined with the utter failure of its air defences, means that the Mike Tyson haymaker ended up being a sucker punch delivered right to the back of Iran's head. An ancient air force isn't a good start when you're going up against the US.
Iran
but an
was
old air
not
force that
ready
isn't
at
even
all.
being maintained is an even bigger problem. There are roughly 400 or so aging aircraft that have been crippled by sanctions, and they lack modern capabilities, Afterburner says. At least there were 400 aircraft in Iran's air force. There are a lot fewer now. But that sums it up, because even if Iran's pilots were foolish enough to try to take to the skies in their older fighter jets, they wouldn't even be able to trust those airframes to fulfill the limited capabilities that they're supposed to have. There were plenty of hints that this would be the case long before the US unleashed its firestorm against Iran's air force. Back in May 2022, Iran International reported that the volume of sanctions levelled against Iran was behind a spate of Air Force accidents that had resulted in several deaths. A pair of Iran's pilots had died at Iran's Dezfoul airbase in June 2021, both due to sudden glitches in their ejector seats that happened before they even got the aircraft off the ground. Retired pilot Brigadier General Kiyumaz Haidarian, who trained in the US and flew for the Iranian Air Force both before and after the 1979 revolution in the country, made it clear why this happened. Accidents happen everywhere, and no one in the world has managed to decrease the number of accidents to zero. But if the equipment is complete, it's natural that the number of accidents will be fewer, he said.
Yes.
In other words, ejector seats explode on their own when you don't have the parts to maintain them. By June 2025, the national interest was calling Iran's Air Force a mess, as it noted that Iran had gone to extreme lengths to keep a handful of its ancient aircraft airworthy, but even those weren't ever going to be effective against a modern air force. Again, sanctions were to blame, as Iran has to deal with the 1-2 punch of having an old fleet and the complete inability to maintain the majority of the aircraft that were in that fleet. So the fight was always going to play out in America's favor.
Now I just don't understand why was Iran even trying to go against America. The only thing that I think that is a cause of danger for America is that Iran still has nuclear weapons, and that is the only issue, because the kind of issue that you have with Pakistan, that if you attack them, they are always like, okay, we will just shoot our nuclear weapons. That is the only main reason why no country will want to go fully against them. Other than that, Iran does not have a single reason. Their jets are old and their radars are old. Everything they have is just so bad. Or I think so they were so overpowered by their ego that they couldn't see like how powerful US is actually.
And like after they have made mistake, I don't know that what US is going to about to do, because I just feel like they are just about to remove them from the map of the world, because they're destroying everything over there. And also I just want to know the effects of nuclear weapons, like how deadly and dangerous
You don't
they
know
are.
about Hiroshima and Nagasaki?
Yeah, I know, like they're
That's
that kind of like powerful.
Cities are gone completely.
Oh my god, that's scary.
And also there are remains, after many years, people are still born without a hand, or they have some internal diseases.
Oh
yeah,
my
but
God.
I have seen recent videos of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They are doing better now.
Better now.
Much better. But yeah, the thing is that is a big problem, and that is the main issue about nuclear weapons. So what do you guys think about it? Do let us know in the comment section below. So do like, share, and
Subscribe.
bye.